Good evening, everyone, and welcome back. Welcome to day 3 of Cryptid Week. Tonight is different. Tonight, we are stepping into territory that many people never speak about out loud. Territory that, once you understand it, changes the way you look at the world around you, at the tree line beyond your yard, at the shadows pooling at the edge of a parking lot, at the strange sound you heard last night outside your window and told yourself was just the wind. Tonight, we are talking about skinwalkers. Now, before we begin, I want you to do something for me. I want you to get comfortable. Pull a blanket around your shoulders if you have one nearby. Set your phone down somewhere close. Make sure the lights in your room are on, or at least one of them. And then take a slow, deep breath, because what you are about to hear are real accounts from real people. These are not fiction. These are not campfire tales invented for entertainment. These are experiences submitted by men and women who were living ordinary, unremarkable lives, driving home from holiday visits, walking late-night paths, stepping outside to take out the trash, when something stepped out of the darkness and shattered every comfortable idea they had ever held about the natural world. Skinwalkers, in Navajo tradition, they are among the most feared and sacred subjects that exist. So feared, in fact, that many within the Navajo Nation will not speak the word aloud, will not describe what they look like, and will not engage in any conversation that could be seen as an invitation. They are shapeshifters. They are beings that were once human, or at least wear the shape of something human, and have crossed into something else entirely. Something that moves on two legs like a man but crouches like an animal. Something that can mimic the voice of a child, or the bark of a dog, or the cry of a chicken, all with terrifying precision. Something that, if the old stories are to be believed, is drawn to those who speak its name, those who play its music, those who wander too close to sacred land in the deep of the night. You might be skeptical. That is perfectly fine. Most of the people in tonight's stories were skeptical too, right up until the moment they weren't. So settle in. Let the room around you grow quiet. Let the darkness outside your window do what darkness does. And listen carefully, because these stories deserve to be heard. If you are joining us here for the very first time tonight, welcome. We are so glad you found us. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. This community has grown into something truly special, and every single one of you is a part of that. Now, let us begin. Story 1, The Parking Lot in Arizona. The year was 2010, and the holidays had just come and gone. A man had spent Christmas with his family in Kentucky, the warmth of that visit still lingering somewhere in the back of his chest. And now it was time to make the long drive home to Los Angeles. He loaded up his car, said his goodbyes, and pointed the nose of his vehicle west, rolling onto the I-40, that long ribbon of highway that cuts across the entire country like a seam holding two different worlds together. For hours he drove. Mile after mile of changing landscape passed outside his windows, rolling hills giving way to flatland, flatland giving way to something wilder and more open. The sky darkened slowly as the afternoon faded, and by the time true night fell around him, the road ahead was lit only by his own headlights and whatever stars the sky chose to offer. Then the weariness set in. That particular brand of exhaustion that settles deep into your body after hours behind a wheel. The kind that starts behind your eyes and works its way down into your shoulders, your forearms, your very fingers on the steering wheel. He recognized it for what it was and made the sensible decision. At the next exit, he would stop. He would find a hotel room, get a proper rest, and continue fresh in the morning. That exit brought him to a small town called Holbrook, Arizona. It sat roughly 20 to 30 minutes east of Flagstaff, where motels lined the highway the way small towns tend to offer travelers, simply without ceremony, just a roof and a bed, and a key card slipped under a front desk window. He checked into a standard room, nothing fancy, just 4 walls and a mattress and the low hum of a heating unit. Then, hungry after the long drive, he found a Taco Bell nearby and picked up a late dinner through the drive-through window, eating in the car with the particular satisfaction of someone who just needed something warm and simple after a very long day. But he was not quite ready to turn in for the night. With his food in hand and a full tank of gas, he did what many curious, restless people do when dropped somewhere unfamiliar. He explored. He turned onto the back roads that wound through the surrounding desert and drove slowly, taking in the vast emptiness around him. Out there in the dark, the desert was something else entirely. The stars pressed close and bright without the competition of city lights. The scrub brush and sand stretched in every direction without fence or building to interrupt it. It was the kind of landscape that makes you feel very small, but in a way that is almost peaceful if you let it be. And then he found the radio station. He had been flipping through frequencies, searching for something to listen to, when he landed on a signal playing what could only be described as traditional Native American chants. The sound filled his car, deep, rhythmic drum beats punctuating haunting vocals that rose and fell in patterns that felt ancient, ceremonial, deeply rooted in something he could not name. Instead of turning it off or searching further, he did something that he would later reflect on with a chill running down his spine. He turned the volume up, all the way up. He rolled both windows completely down, and he let those sounds pour out into the open desert air as he cruised those winding, unpaved paths at a slow, unhurried pace. He soaked it all in, the night air, the stars, the drums, the chanting, thinking, as many of us would, that it was beautiful, that it was atmosphere, that it was one of those rare, perfect travel moments. He did not know, then, what those sounds might mean to whatever was listening. Around midnight, he finally turned back toward the motel. He pulled into the rear parking lot, away from the main road, where the lighting was sparse and uneven. Shadows gathered thick between the lamps, casting long silhouettes across the gravel. He parked the car and noticed the geography of the lot for the first time. In front of his vehicle, the ground rose in a raised embankment, a 5 to 6 foot wall of packed earth leading up to a higher section of parking lot above. The slope was steep, overgrown in places with sparse scrub brush, and tangled tumbleweeds had gathered against a wire fence along the top edge. He opened both car doors wide to air things out, reached across to the passenger seat, and started the routine task of gathering his bag of clothes. He reached down to the passenger floor where his Taco Bell wrappers and road snacks had scattered. Over the miles, the small, ordinary debris of a long drive, and began collecting them. That is when the sound happened. The roar that tore through the night air was not something his mind had any category for. It was not a sound he had heard before or would ever be able to fully describe with language afterward. What he could say was this: it was the deepest, most powerful thing he had ever heard, but layered inside it were other sounds that should not have been combined. The low, resonant growl of a bear braided together with the high, shrill squeal of a pig, and beneath both of those, something that made the hair on every part of his body stand straight up. The sound of a baby crying, not a real baby, or at least not a natural one. Something that wore the idea of a baby's cry the way a costume is worn, clumsily, wrong, almost right, but unmistakably not. All three of those sounds happening simultaneously, vibrating through the air, vibrating through his chest, vibrating through his blood. He looked up. There on the embankment above him, outlined against the dark sky, stood something. It was enormous. In that first panicked assessment, he placed it at 7 feet tall, possibly larger. Its shoulders were wide, filling the silhouette with a breadth that no man and few animals could match. The head was wrong in a way that registered immediately. The shape of it was a wolf's head, complete with pointed ears that shifted and swiveled with precise, deliberate movement, as though actively listening to every sound he made in the gravel below. Its arms hung long, far too long, reaching past where knees would be on a human figure. The hands at the ends of those arms oversized and clenched, swaying gently as the creature shifted its weight from one foot to the other on the pavement above. The body was covered in dark, coarse fur, matted in places, unkempt in a way that suggested something raw and wild. He saw it clearly enough to absorb every detail, and then his body made the decision before his mind had fully caught up. He ran. Not a jog, not a hurried walk. A full, flat-out sprint across the gravel of that parking lot, heart slamming against his ribcage, feet hitting the ground so hard it sent vibrations up through his legs. His hand went to his pocket and found the keycard. His fingers were slick, soaked instantly in the cold sweat of pure animal fear, and he fumbled at the door, pushing the against the reader, hearing the lock click green and throwing himself inside. He slammed the door shut behind him and immediately threw the deadbolt. Then the chain. Then he began dragging furniture, every piece of it he could get his hands on, and stacking it against the door as a barricade, the legs of chairs scraping against the floor, the weight of a small dresser grinding slowly across the carpet. He stripped the sheets and blankets from the bed, bundled them tight around himself, and retreated to the bathroom, the farthest point from the outside world that the small room offered. He locked that door too, and then he lowered himself into the empty bathtub, pulled the blankets around him as tightly as they would go, and sat with his back against the cold porcelain while his heartbeat slowly, very slowly, began to return to something approaching normal. He did not sleep, not a single moment of it. Instead, with shaking hands, he spent the long, dark hours scrolling his phone, searching desperately for something that would explain what he had seen. And he found it. Forum after forum, account after account, describing creatures that matched what had stood on that embankment. Shape-shifting entities rooted in Navajo tradition. Beings called Skinwalkers. The details aligned in a way that could not be dismissed as coincidence. The wolf-like form, the unnatural proportions, the sounds that combined multiple creatures at once. And the part that made his skin go cold all over again, these entities were said to be drawn by certain sounds, by chanting, by traditional music played near sacred land. He looked up the location of his motel on his phone. It sat right on the edge of Navajo land, marked by faded highway signs warning outsiders to respect the sacred ground nearby. The radio station's signal had been strong out there, pulled from the heart of that territory. He had rolled his windows down and turned the volume up and driven those back roads soaking in every note. Whatever had heard him had answered. When the sky finally began to lighten at the edges and sunrise arrived, he did not linger. He packed his bag, walked to his car, both doors of which had stood wide open all night long, and found, to his astonishment, that nothing had been touched. The music equipment loaded in the back seat, thousands of dollars worth of amplifiers and speakers and gear, sat exactly as he had left it. Not a single item. Missing, whatever had been out, there had not been interested in robbery. He peeled out of Holbrook with a shaking kind of relief, heading west toward the interstate. He stopped at a gas station and liquor store just before the on-ramp, one of those places that opened at 7 in the morning sharp, and found a line already forming outside, locals waiting for the first sales of the day. While he stood in that queue, tired and hollowed out and desperate for caffeine, a local man struck up a conversation. He was friendly enough, asking where the out-of-state plates were from, what had brought him through, probing with the easy curiosity of someone accustomed to seeing tired travelers pass through. And then, for reasons he still cannot fully explain, the young man told the whole story. Every detail, the radio station, the desert drive, the windows down, the roar, the creature on the embankment, the barricade, the bathtub. He left nothing out. The local man listened, and when the story was finished, something shifted in his expression. The polite interest gave way to something quieter, a knowing look, almost amused, but carrying a weight underneath it that was unmistakably serious. He held that gaze for just a moment, and then he laughed low and replied with 7 words. "They don't usually mess with white people." He said nothing else. Just those words, delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who understood exactly what had happened and had no need to say more. The young man drove straight through to Los Angeles without stopping. No gas station breaks, no rest stops, no detours. He put every mile he could between himself and that town as fast as the speed limit would allow. And even now, years later, he says he tries not to dwell on what he saw. He still does not know exactly what it was, but he knows it was real. And he knows that some sounds, played in some places at some hours of the night, are heard by things that do not need to be disturbed. If you are listening to this tonight, and something about these accounts feels familiar, if you have had your own moment out in the dark somewhere that you cannot quite explain, please share it in the comments below. This community holds space for those stories. You are not alone in having seen things that do not fit neatly into the world we think we know. Story 2, The Road Home and EAR Flagstaff. The second person speaking tonight describes themselves as rational, grounded, not the kind of individual who collects creepy stories or jumps at shadows. At the time of this encounter, they were a teacher living in a rural stretch of northern Arizona, roughly 40 minutes outside of Flagstaff, a region that sits not far from the boundaries of Navajo Nation land. They knew little about local folklore back then, and the way they frame it says everything. Honestly, I wish I still didn't. It was late December, the kind of cold that gets inside your coat and stays there. They had just left a parent-teacher conference night at school around 8 in the evening, and the sky outside was already completely dark. That deep, uncompromising darkness that rural desert roads have in winter when there is no moon to offer any softening. They were exhausted. The kind of tired that comes from a full day of teaching children, and then spending hours in a gymnasium talking to parents about report cards and behavior plans. They just wanted to get home. The drive took them along a stretch of isolated highway before turning onto a narrow country road that led to their rental house. No street lights. Open desert stretching away on one side, and dense pine forest pressing close on the other. 2 very different kinds of darkness sitting side by side along that thin strip of road. And then, as they turned onto that final stretch toward home, they hit the brakes so hard the seat belt locked against their chest. Something was standing in the middle of the road. Their first thought was elk, perfectly reasonable. The area had plenty of them, and elk on the road at night were not unusual out there. But as the headlights steadied and the shape came into focus, the explanation fell apart. This was not an elk. It was not shaped right, not proportioned right. It looked like a dog, the basic outline of a large dog, but the scale of it was completely wrong. It was not large breed dog large. It was not even wolf large. This animal, standing there in the beams of the headlights, came up nearly to the hood of the SUV. The narrator is 6 feet tall. Standing beside that creature, they estimate, its head would have been level with their shoulders. It stood broadside in the road, positioned halfway between the open field and the tree line, as though it had been crossing and paused. The fur appeared dark, not healthy glossy, but dull, matted, the texture of something old and wrong. And it was. Perfectly, completely still. Not moving, not pacing, just standing there with its head turned in the direction of the vehicle. The headlights were full on it. It did not flinch. It did not squint. It did not show any of the instinctive reactions a real animal shows when suddenly caught in a blaze of light. And then they saw its mouth. The lips were peeled back, not in a bark, not mid-vocalization, but simply held that way. The teeth exposed, fixed, and the eyes were wrong in a way that bypassed rational explanation and went straight to something instinctive and ancient inside the observer's nervous system. There was no eye shine, no green or yellow reflecting back the way every animal's eyes should in the dark. Instead, the eyes looked focused, intelligent, not tracking the car. Tracking the person inside it. Then came the jaw movement, a subtle, jerking shift, like something adjusting itself from the inside, repositioning. And in that moment, a wave of dread unlike anything they had ever felt washed over the driver from head to toe. Every nerve in their body fired at once, carrying one single, overwhelming message. This thing is pretending. They threw the car into reverse and backed away fast enough to nearly fishtail on the road's surface, and they did not look away from it the entire time they retreated. The creature did not move toward them. It did not run. It simply stood there, tracking their movement with its head alone as the car backed further and further away, until finally the narrator swung around and drove not home, but into town. They sat in a 24-hour diner for nearly an hour, hands wrapped around a cup of something warm, trying to convince themselves of something rational. Trying on explanations the way you try on clothes that do not quite fit. An unusually large wolf, strange lighting, exhaustion playing tricks. They even searched online, giant wolves, Arizona direwolf sightings, anything with a reasonable-sounding answer. And that search is what led them, against their wishes, to the accounts and descriptions associated with skinwalkers. Animals that look wrong, unnaturally large, eyes that carry human intelligence, standing motionless in roads, near wooded areas bordering reservation land, near the exact coordinates of where this teacher had been driving home from parent conferences on a cold December night. Eventually, they drove home. The road was empty. No sign of it. They parked as close to the front door as the driveway would allow, had the key already in hand before stepping out of the car, and then a grown person in their 30s, by their own accounting, sprinted to the door like a frightened child. Every light in the house went on. Every lock was checked. And for hours, they stood at the windows, scanning the field, scanning the tree line. At one point, and they acknowledge it may have been imagination, they thought they saw a shape standing at the far edge of the trees across the field. Too tall, too still, but when they blinked it was gone. They never saw it again after that night, but the late road home changed. Whenever possible, they took a different route, or drove earlier. Something quiet and permanent had shifted in how they moved through the world after dark. Story 3, The Greenway in the Dark. This story takes place in a city, not the desert, not a rural road. A city, with a river running through it and a greenway path and ordinary apartment buildings and the sounds of highway traffic in the distance. Sometimes the most unsettling thing about these accounts is how familiar the setting feels. The narrator was a student at the time, living near their campus because circumstances had left them temporarily without a car. The solution was practical and simple, an electric scooter for the daily commute. Their apartment bordered a river, and that gave them access to a greenway path that ran directly between their complex and the campus, bypassing all the traffic of downtown. Straight, direct, efficient. The one consistent problem with the route was a quarter-mile stretch behind the apartment complex that had almost no lighting at all. The scooter's headlight was, by their own description, essentially useless, and they had long since decided not to rely on it, trusting instead their eyes to read movement on the path ahead. Over a full year of making this commute at late hours, they could count the number of other people they encountered on that dark stretch on one hand. There was the naked, disoriented individual tweaking approximately a mile from home, which necessitated a call to the police upon arrival back at the apartment. There was the man whose gaze felt cold and deliberate even in the pitch dark, and who clearly was not pleased to see a silent, lightless electric scooter appearing out of nowhere. These were the kinds of things you learned to navigate when you were the only person apparently willing to be out on that path after midnight. And then there was the one encounter that still lives in a different part of their memory. The one they could not tell friends or family about for a long time because they were not sure anyone would believe them. It was a night like any other. They reached the back gate of their complex, the entry point that led from the Greenway path up to the apartment building, and began to unlatch it. And that is when the sensation arrived. Not a sound, not a sight, just a feeling immediate and unmistakable, the same crawling awareness they had felt that time the man on the path had stared them down. The feeling of being watched. They looked down the path ahead. Perhaps 20 yards away, positioned beneath a flickering orange street lamp that marked the far end of the Greenway, stood a German shepherd. Or at least something that wore the shape of a German shepherd. It stood absolutely motionless. Not the fidgety stillness of a real dog assessing a stranger, the kind where there is still breath visible, still a shift in weight, still the flicker of an ear. This was different. This was the stillness of something that was not a living, breathing animal in the usual sense. It looked, as the narrator puts it, taxidermied. No visible breathing, no blinking, just fixed, locked eyes across the 20 yards of path between them. And the eyes, even at that distance, even in that dim, flickering orange light, the iris was visible. Small and beady and, in the worst possible sense of the word, almost human. They froze at the gate, and the creature froze at its end of the path, a mutual, terrible standoff in the dark. The narrator understood something intuitively in that moment. Their gaze was the only thing holding it in place. The act of watching, of keeping eyes on it, this was the only form of control they had. The river flowed beside them. Cars passed on the nearby highway, ordinary sounds of an ordinary city night, deafening somehow against the silence of that stare. Then from somewhere in the foliage beyond the creature, further down the path, in the undergrowth adjacent to where it stood, came the small sound of twigs snapping. Something in the brush. A rabbit, probably, a groundhog, something small and unremarkable. Before that sound had even finished echoing, the creature's head snapped toward it. Not the slow swivel of a dog following a sound. The precise, instantaneous pivot of something with mechanical reaction speed, like an owl, like a machine, perfectly targeted. And in that half-second of the creature's attention being drawn elsewhere, every nerve in the narrator's body ignited simultaneously and screamed at them to move. But they did not move. Fear had locked every joint in place. The only thing providing any comfort at all was knowing exactly where that thing was, keeping their eyes on it, maintaining that fragile and terrifying vigil. And then it moved. It rose up on its hind legs and bolted into the tree line in a single, explosive burst of motion, so fast that the word disappeared feels like the most accurate description available. There, and then not there. The darkness swallowed it instantly. It took several full seconds for the rest of their body to process what their eyes had just witnessed. Then, moving on pure autopilot, they threw the gate open, lifted the scooter up the mulchy incline, set it down in the parking lot, turned it on, and rode to their building entrance in a state of complete, focused, survival-driven action. No thought, just movement towards safety. It was only after they were inside their apartment, sitting on the edge of their bed, that the adrenaline began to release, and the feeling, unexpected and overwhelming, that they needed to cry. They did not use the Greenway after dark again. The extra traffic of the downtown route was, they concluded, a perfectly acceptable trade. They could handle crackheads and junkies. They could not handle whatever that thing had been. After graduating and getting a car, the daytime confidence returned somewhat. But nighttime noises in the apartment carry a different weight now. Once, something tapped on the bedroom window, and the certainty they once had about being able to handle themselves in the dark, they describe it as simply gone. There are things out there that are not what they appear to be, beyond our comprehension, beyond our categories, and bravery in those moments is not a tool that helps you. Trust the fear, they say. It is the smarter instinct. If this story hit close to home for you, if you have had that feeling in the dark of being watched by something that should not be there, hit that like button so others can find this video. Share it with someone who you think would understand. You would be surprised how many. People carry these stories quietly, waiting for a place to put them. Story 4, the Dear AT Grandma's House. Some of the most disarming encounters with the unexplained begin in the most comforting possible settings. A grandmother's backyard, corn in buckets for the deer. The quiet, gentle ritual of feeding wild animals who have learned to trust a particular human schedule. The narrator's grandmother lives near a popular walking trail in Missouri, and her backyard borders a large stretch of common ground where deer regularly gather. Over time, the grandmother had begun leaving food out for them, first for the birds, then slowly, sweetly for the deer as well. She had even given names to the ones with distinctive features. It was the kind of wholesome, small joy thing that grandmothers do that makes the world feel warmer. And thanks to her, the narrator had experienced many close, easy encounters with deer over the years. Beautiful animals, docile, nothing to fear. Except for one. The first sighting happened around 5 in the afternoon. The narrator had gone out to fill the small corn buckets their grandmother left at the edge of the yard. Across the field, a deer was moving, but moving strangely, stumbling, an unsteady, lurching gait that suggested injury. The natural response was compassion. They shook the cup of corn to catch its attention, the way you might try to coax a hurt animal closer so you could help it along. The deer looked at them, and in that moment of eye contact, something happened that the narrator still cannot explain. A shock, the word they use. A jolt of something wrong traveling straight through them, originating from that gaze and arriving somewhere deep in their chest. The feeling of being assessed by something that had no right to be looking at them that way. The deer began moving toward them, slowly, clumsily, still stumbling, nearly falling forward with each step in that disturbing, broken way. And as it came closer, the details began to assemble into something that did not fit the category of a normal, injured animal. One antler was missing. The remaining one sat at an odd angle, and the eyes, the pupils, were shaped wrong, shaped human. The narrator dumped the corn into the bucket and went back inside. They stood at the window and watched through the glass as the creature ate. The entire time it fed, it never looked away from them, never blinked. Its gaze remained fixed. On the window, on the person behind it, without the intermittent glancing of a normal deer checking its surroundings for safety. Just unbroken, unsettling eye contact through the glass. No other deer came that day. On a day when 4 to 15 might normally arrive at the corn buckets, not a single other animal approached while this one was there. When it finished eating, it turned and made its way back toward the tree line in that strange, lurching walk. It looked back over its shoulder, multiple times, checking to see if it was still being watched. Then it reached the trees. And stood up, on its hind legs, still looking back at the house. Standing upright in the shadows of the trees, 2 legs, steady now in a way it had not been before, watching. The narrator closed the blinds and tried to explain this to their grandmother. The grandmother offered a gentle alternative reading, that the deer's strange behavior had simply put the narrator on edge, made everything seem more alarming than it was. They accepted this because there was nothing else to do with it, and they went back to their day. That night, a sound at the window. They assumed it was the grandmother, needing to take the dogs out, perhaps tapping to get their attention. They walked to the window and drew the blinds. It was the deer, standing on its hind legs at the window, one hoof resting against the glass, staring directly at them from just outside the pane. They snapped the blinds shut and did not look again. They retreated to the bathroom, the only room in the house with a lock and no window, and sat there on the cold tile floor listening. They could hear it outside, the grind of a hoof against the glass, the scrape of the remaining antler dragging slowly, deliberately across the surface, as though testing the material, searching for a way through, or simply announcing its presence with the patience of something that had no particular reason to hurry. Eventually, it stopped. Later, they and the grandmother were able to watch it from the bedroom window, standing at the tree line, still upright on its hind legs, watching the house in the dark. Since then, it comes back, not every night but often enough. The tapping on the window, they hear it and they wait, and eventually it stops and retreats. An outdoor camera has been installed. If they ever capture footage, they plan to share it. Some uninvited things, it seems, develop habits. Story 5, the white dog in Canada. This one comes from Canada, from land that a family owns several hours outside a major city, dense forest, open fields, no neighbors within earshot, no roads nearby. The kind of property that feels beautifully remote during daylight and takes on an entirely different character once the sun goes down. The narrator was visiting with their father one late fall night. A full moon hung bright overhead, generous enough to cast clear light across the open field. It was around midnight when things began to unfold. The father had gone inside the house they were renovating to handle some tasks, leaving the narrator outside alone. Then from the direction of the forest, about 300 feet away, came a sound. A yell, not a voice, but something in pain or mimicking the sound of something in pain. Coyotes were common on the property. They hunted there, left carcasses, made their presence known. The narrator processed the sound as a dying animal and went back to their outdoor work. 5 minutes passed, and then they turned around and found a white dog standing 10 feet away on the grass. No warning, no approach heard, just suddenly present 10 feet away in the moonlit dark. The narrator went inside the camper kept on the property and retrieved 2 treats, the kind used for their own pets at home, and returned, moving slowly, speaking in a calm and gentle voice, offering an open posture, everything you do when trying not to spook a stray. They approached to roughly arm's reach. The dog did not react. Its body language was entirely blank. No curiosity, no wariness, no aggression. None of the range of responses a real stray animal produces when approached by a stranger in the dark. Just stillness, and eyes wide, unblinking, fixed on the narrator's face without ever drifting away. The narrator took a few steps backward, creating some distance, watching for a response. The dog turned its head toward the forest, toward the exact spot where the yelling sound had come from earlier. Then it turned back, then toward the forest again, then back. It repeated this 4 times, each motion precise and deliberate. 4 times turning to show where the sound had come from, 4 times turning back to make sure the narrator was watching. Then it held eye contact for 5 full seconds, long, steady, unwavering, before exploding into a run toward the trees and vanishing into the underbrush. The narrator retrieved the shotgun from the camper and sat at the window watching the tree line for the rest of the night. Something moved in the woods. In the darkness beyond where the moonlight reached, a silhouette shifted against the trees, the shape and size and intent of it obscured by darkness, present only as a suggestion. Later that week, when the narrator described these events to local friends, several of them did not seem surprised. They had their own versions of the story. Odd dogs, eyes that looked human, forest yells in the dark, things that retreated in ways no natural animal retreats. They described it in the context of native lore they had grown up knowing, white dog forms, sometimes described as scouts or advanced signals for something larger, using the shape of a harmless animal to approach, to assess, to watch. The narrator researched afterwards. What they found ruled out certain specific legend figures and pointed toward something consistent across multiple traditions. The white dog, the yell from the forest as a lure, the approach without aggression, the head-turning instruction, 4 deliberate repetitions, as though trying to show the narrator something or draw them toward it. No stray dogs had been reported from any nearby farm that season. The father confirmed it. The narrator wonders still about what was really standing in the moonlight 10 feet away. Story 6, The Chicken Call in North Dakota. This story takes place in a small town in North Dakota, population 700, sitting about 30 minutes from the Canadian border. The narrator visited there every summer without fail, hosted by their brother and his wife in a house where 7 chickens were kept, all accounted for each evening and placed securely in their coop around sunset as part of the household's regular routine. One midnight, the narrator and their boyfriend were sitting out on the deck in the backyard. The night was still. The conversation had drifted. It had touched on skinwalkers earlier in the evening, which the narrator freely admits was not the wisest topic to raise, and had since moved on to lighter subjects. The 2 of them had been talking for perhaps 30 minutes about nothing in particular, ordinary things, the easy kind of late-night conversation you have when the evening is warm and comfortable. And then, cutting straight through the middle of a sentence, came the sound. A chicken, except it was not a chicken. The narrator knew chicken sounds. They had spent time around their brother's coop. Real chickens have a particular quality to their calls, gurgly, rough, textured in a way that comes from a specific kind of vocal anatomy. This sound was smooth, polished. It had the pitch and the general shape of a chicken call, but none of the roughness, none of the texture, none of the organic imperfection of a real bird's voice. It lasted 4 to 5 seconds and then cut off abruptly, leaving the still night air exactly as it had found it. The narrator immediately went silent, gesturing to their boyfriend to stop talking. He caught the cue and fell quiet within 2 seconds. They asked if he had heard it. He confirmed immediately that he had clear and unmistakable right there beside them in the dark. Then, roughly 5 seconds after the sound faded, came something else. 1 or 2 footsteps on the grass, not distant, roughly 12 feet away, close to the deck, maybe 5 feet from where they sat, and more specifically in the exact spot where a family member had stood earlier, holding one of the chickens for a grandchild to see. That detail settled into the narrator's mind like something heavy. Whatever had made that sound had seemingly observed that moment, the child, the chicken being held, the specific location, and had returned to that same spot, attempting to replicate the bait, attempting, perhaps, to lure someone into the yard. Both of them sat frozen for a long moment after the footsteps registered. Then they quietly gathered their things and went inside, locking the door behind them. In the morning, all 7 chickens were accounted for, undisturbed in the coop. The grass around the deck showed no clear prints, though the fresh dew might have been expected to preserve evidence if something had been there physically. No motion lights had triggered. No cameras had caught anything. The town was as quiet as a town of 700 always is. But both the narrator and the boyfriend retained the same clear memory of that sound and its wrongness, the smoothness of it, the absence of the gurgly roughness that belongs to a real chicken's call and nothing else. Realistic explanations presented themselves and were considered and found wanting. A fox or raccoon attempting mimicry, possible, but those animals rely on stealth, not sound, and their vocalizations never approach. Poultry pitch and progression with that kind of precision. Wind distortion carrying bird sounds from a distance, ruled out by the complete stillness of the night air. What remained was something the narrator is candid about believing. A skinwalker, drawing on what it had observed, using the imitation of something harmless and familiar to test reactions, to draw movement, to lure. The footsteps after the call in exactly the right spot were not a coincidence. They avoided the deck after dark for the rest of that week. Some invitations, once recognized for what they are better left unanswered. Story 7. The Red Eyes in the Bedroom. This story begins in Denver, Colorado in 2016. The narrator is a horror enthusiast, someone who has always been drawn to Skinwalker stories, werewolf lore, paranormal accounts. They loved this material. They consumed it eagerly. They had no idea how different it would feel to encounter the real version. By 2021, life had moved them to a city in southern Colorado. They were living with family, their mother, their younger brother, and their father, who was ill. They had a cleaning job at a call center, ordinary life, an ordinary Tuesday becoming Wednesday. That particular evening, they came home from work and settled into a familiar routine, playing Destiny 2 online with friends, a headset on, one ear in the game and the other ear listening to recordings of Navajo shamans discussing Skinwalker history and tradition. The game session eventually wrapped up around midnight. They went to bed. At 3 in the morning, something woke them. There were 2 red eyes in the dark corner of the room, fixed on them, unblinking, not moving. The paralysis was immediate and total, not the confusion of being half asleep, complete full-body immobility, the kind that arrives with the certainty that moving will invite something catastrophic. Every muscle locked in place. The only thing functioning was their mind, which screamed silently inside a body that would not respond. And then the growling started, low and close, building gradually, accompanied by occasional snarls that cut through the darkness of the room where nothing existed except those red eyes and the sounds surrounding them. The growling drew nearer to the bedside. The air around the mattress seemed to vibrate with it. Inches away now. Whatever it was positioned itself directly beside where they lay. The eyes conveyed something that went beyond words. They communicated something ancient and absolute, that whatever this person's world had been before this moment, it no longer held. That they existed now entirely at the mercy of whatever was looking at them. This stretched on for what felt like hours. Eventually, some incremental retreat occurred. The presence backed off slightly, enough that movement returned slowly to the narrator's limbs. They chose not to move anyway, knowing it remained nearby, waiting, gauging. When sunrise finally arrived at the edges of the window, the eyes dissolved. The room was empty, silent. The narrator moved through every room of the house with their handgun, checking locks and windows and the sleeping faces of family members. Everyone was alive, but not undisturbed. The mother had been woken in the night by sounds she could not identify. The father, confused, asked about warped chainsaw sounds that had moved through the walls. The brother had seen it. He described it precisely. A tall, thin figure with a wolf's head, teeth like knives, hands that were human in basic shape but equipped with long, extending claws. The father attributed it to horror content watched before bed. The narrator denied any films or audio left running. The father insisted on collective delusion caused by external influence. Eventually, in the weeks that followed, odd things accumulated. Consistently failed game sessions. A supervisor at work complaining about cleaning quality in areas that coworkers confirmed sparkled clean. A resignation after the situation became untenable. The narrator sought out a shaman on the outskirts of the city and explained everything. The shaman was neither surprised nor dismissive. He said the narrator's deep interest had drawn attention, not necessarily because of negative energy, but possibly due to native blood somewhere in the family lineage that kept the entity curious, kept it nearby, kept it watching. He offered a house blessing through a priest friend, provided the narrator agreed to stop feeding the interaction through curiosity or discussion. They agreed. 2 days later, their father's health deteriorated rapidly. Hospice was the only option. The family faced what families face when someone is leaving and there is nothing left to do but be present. 3 days after that, the father asked for the room to be cleared of everyone except the narrator. Alone together in that quiet room, the father said he had seen something at his window the night before. And then he did something else entirely, he apologized. For wrongs against the brother and the mother, for a history of difficult years, for moments of cruelty and temper. He made his peace with God. He asked the narrator to protect the ones he was leaving behind. Those were his last words. And the narrator carries them still. Be careful, they say, when you speak about skinwalkers. In a voice call, out loud, in any form, there are forces in this world that we will never fully understand, and speaking of them, inviting them into the space of your conversation can draw their attention. They will come. They do come, not as fiction, as something you will carry in your memory for the rest of your life, changing the way you experience the dark in every room you ever sleep in again. Story 8, The Hand in the Dark. This one is from rural Oklahoma, and the narrator is very clear about who they were at the time this happened. They were 11 years old, a child living in a genuine middle-of-nowhere stretch of country, no neighbors visible from the property, just dirt roads and patchy cell service, and the unspectacular, practical reality of rural living. Coyotes and wild dogs were a genuine consideration, not a hypothetical one. Their father kept a rifle nearby. They themselves would pick up a large knife or machete when they had to go outside at night. This was just how things were, normal country precautions. One night around 9, they went out to take the trash to the can. It was fully dark. The can sat roughly 50 feet from the house, near a cluster of bushes and scrub trees, close enough to seem manageable, far enough to require a deliberate walk into the dark. They tossed the bag in, turned back toward the house. And something grabbed their ankle. The first instinct was entirely reasonable. A thorn bush, a branch, something snagging at their foot. They half stumbled forward and yanked at their leg to pull free, the way you do when you step into something without looking. It did not let go. And then the information their brain had been avoiding arrived all at once. There was pressure on both sides of the ankle, wrapped around it completely. The sensation of fingers, except the fingers felt wrong in a way that overrode the initial interpretation, too long, overlapping where they should not overlap, bent at angles that suggested the joints did not work the way human joints work. They looked down. Something low in the shrubs. In the pale reach of the porch light, they could see a hand. The skin was pale, or appeared so in that light. The fingers were stretched wide apart, unnaturally so, the spaces between them too large, the length of each finger exceeding any proportion that matched a human hand. Bent at wrong angles, extended too far. They swung the machete straight down, where the arm disappeared into the brush. The screech that followed was one of the worst sounds they have ever heard. Not a coyote, not a bobcat. They have heard both of those, and this was not either. It was high-pitched, and then it dropped, shifting into something lower, almost a growl, but layered in that same wrong way, like multiple sounds occupying the same moment without belonging together. The grip released instantly. They ran. Back at the house, the door slammed. Not a dog. From the mountains of northern Mexico, near the Colorado line and not far from reservation boundaries, comes this account from a man who spends much of his summer outdoors. Hiking, fishing, camping. Someone deeply familiar with the rhythms and sounds of high-altitude wilderness, who knows the difference between what belongs and what does not. He also has a dog, an Anatolian shepherd, 120 pounds of muscle and instinct, the kind of working livestock guardian breed that does not easily startle. To illustrate, this dog has stood between his owner and a mountain lion, hackles raised, growling until the cat backed away. He has heard mountain lions screaming in the trees, a sound that, if you have ever heard it, resembles a human scream in a way that raises every hair on your body, and his response was to step forward, not back. This dog does not retreat from things. This dog does not whimper. Over several hikes, wrong for a deer too tall and narrow for either, it slipped behind a trunk and never came out the other side. No branches snapped, no footfalls, it simply was there and then was not. Another time, a coyote call echoed from the tree line, except the rhythm was off. The spacing between yips had a mechanical quality, as though something was approximating coyote sound based on a pattern memorized rather than felt. And the dog's response to this was unlike any coyote he had ever reacted to before. No alert barking. No orientation toward the sound with that forward-leaning excitement a dog shows when it hears a rival in its territory. Just a harder lean into his owner's leg. A quiet, uncomfortable whine. A sound the narrator had never heard from him before and has not heard since. The last incident was at dusk, near a dry wash not far from reservation boundary. The silence descended again and the dog froze mid-step. He turned his head slow. Story about a man at the very edge of his life, and the strange, terrifying, impossible thing that pushed him back from it. 15 years ago, he was not doing well. He describes it plainly: Groundhog Day, boredom, monotony. He was married, no children, and had developed a secret addiction to online gambling. Over time, he had worked through a significant amount of money, mostly belonging to his wife, who held the higher salary and shared a joint bank account with him. When she discovered approximately $45,000 had disappeared, she was understandably furious. He was not ready to be gracious about it. Feeling defensive, ashamed, and childish all at once, he said words he should not have said, threatening to go away and end his life. And in that moment, in the raw mix of anger and self-hatred and humiliation, part of him meant it. He took her car, threw some belongings in, and drove. He found a quiet parking area, B. Alarm, standing fully upright as though this was its natural posture. Its antlers were tall and impressive. Its body was very large, one of the largest deer he had ever seen. And it had been running toward him on those two legs when he woke up, drawing closer across the forest floor. He stood and held his ground. The deer's eyes were on him, and there was something in those eyes, not the quick, alert assessment of a wild animal checking whether a human is a threat. Something slower, more deliberate. The quality of being looked at by something that is deciding something about you. He reached into his bag and threw some potato chips toward it. A reflex, surely, that would startle it, give it something else to focus on, break the moment. The chips landed near it. The deer did not flinch, did not look down, the eyes did not leave his face. As it moved another step closer, and the dusk light fell across its body in more detail, the fur rays. Barely coherent, into two hikers on a path who looked at him with obvious alarm. He asked the time. He asked the distance to the trailhead. Half a day. They gave him water. It turned out that in his wandering he had looped roughly back in the direction he had come, a stroke of navigational luck that he still does not fully understand. He did not tell the hikers about the deer. He told them he had gotten lost, and they were kind enough to accept that. He made it back to the car. He drove home. He knocked on his front door and looked at his wife and told her he was sorry and that he would do whatever it took to fix what he had broken. They made it through. It took a long time, but they made it. When he eventually told a few people about the deer standing on two legs, they offered dehydration, stress, and hunger as explanations. He pointed out that he had been neither hungry nor dehydrated during the encounter. He had eaten and drunk adequately up to that point, and the bag of supplies had been with him. They had no answer for that. He later found online the description that fit what he had seen. The word Skinwalker, the creature that wears the shape of a deer but stands upright, moves wrong, and carries something in its eyes that has no place in the animal kingdom. He never went back into those woods. What do you think about this story? Is it possible that what he encountered in that forest actually saved his life by frightening him back into wanting it? We would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. This community holds these conversations with care and without judgment. Story 11. The Solovtsky Islands. This story travels further than any of the others tonight. It takes us to the Solovetsky Islands of Russia, an ancient place carrying layers of history so dark and so heavy that they seem to have settled permanently into the land itself. The narrator was 13 years old, part of a school expedition, 2 teachers and 13 children, sailing to the islands for a 2-week stay. The journey began with a train ride, then the approach by water, about an hour's sail to reach the island. On arrival, they set up camp near a small village at the edge of a vast, dense forest. During the train ride, the narrator learned about the place they were going. The Solovetsky Islands had housed a concentration camp. More than 10,000 people had been killed there. Rituals, they were told, had been carried out there as well. The specific nature of those rituals left deliberately unspecified, which in many ways is worse. On the first night, something impossible happened before they had even fully settled. Sound came from a church, clearly audible, undeniable, the tones carrying through the camp, reaching every tent. Except the nearest church was located in a village so far away that carrying at that volume under normal acoustic conditions was simply not possible. Everyone in the narrator's tent heard it. It was not one person's imagination or misinterpretation. 5 people heard the same sound that could not have been there. On the 3rd day, the children found a small river near camp, and along its bank, a blade and a cross. Unsettling in combination. That afternoon, a visit to the village yielded something the narrator describes as one of the 7 wonders of Solovetsky, a local account of a man who put on the bare skin of an animal and walked among people, frightening them. That night, walking alone to the toilet in the dark, the narrator felt it, the weight of being watched. With no one visible anywhere nearby, in a darkness that offered nothing to see, the sensation of a gaze pressing against them from somewhere close. In the days that followed, the exact sequence somewhat blurred by time, as these things often are in memory, the group found a symbol laid out in stones in the forest. Old, very old. No one recognized what it represented. On approximately the 4th night, something walked near the tent while the group slept. Everyone inside saw or heard it. In the morning, they asked around. No one admitted to being outside. Bones of unknown origin had been discovered near the camp on the first day of setup. The narrator and a friend began systematically exploring the surrounding forest during free time. There were sounds coming from deep in the trees, sounds that seemed specifically designed to draw people toward their source. For days, they followed those sounds, looking for a rational explanation, trying to map the geometry of the disturbance. What they began assembling, piece by piece, was a picture that could not be dismissed as coincidence. By the 7th day, peering into the dense forest from the edge of the camp, they began to see them. Tall figures standing in the trees just within the boundary of visibility, watching, not moving. When approached, they disappeared, but not by walking away, by simply ceasing to be in the spot where they had been. One evening, the narrator, Arseny, and a 3rd boy named Sasha stood at the forest edge in silence, waiting. They had decided to be still and patient and see what came. And then a silhouette began to separate from the density of the trees and move forward, accompanied by sound. A formless, indistinct vocalization that shifted and then resolved into words. A female voice, young, frightened, calling for help, the voice of a child. All 3 of them heard it clearly. All 3 of them ran. The fear of that moment, the narrator says, is not something that fades. Years later, the sharpness of it is still present. After that evening, the group stayed at the camp. They watched the forest only from a distance and with the safety of the group around them. When they moved, they looked back. The narrator came home from those 2 weeks changed. And when they finally put together, years later, what those figures in the trees most closely resembled. The shape of them, the behavior, the mimicry of a child's voice to draw victims closer. The word that fit was one they had not known as a 13-year-old standing at the edge of an ancient Russian forest. Skinwalker. And that, dear friends, is where we close tonight's stories. I want to take just a moment to say something from the heart. These accounts, every single one of them, were shared by real people who took the risk of being disbelieved, dismissed, or ridiculed because some part of them needed to say, "This happened to me." There is courage in that, and there is something important in the act of listening. You may believe all of these stories. You may believe none of them. You may, like many of our listeners, find yourself somewhere in the unsettled middle, unable to explain them away entirely, unwilling to accept them completely, carrying them quietly the way you carry certain dreams that feel more real than waking. Wherever you land, I hope tonight has offered you something worth sitting with. Now, YouTube has made it increasingly challenging for long-form creators to reach the people who love this kind of content. The platform favors short videos right now, and channels like this one are simply not being recommended the way they once were. If you want to keep hearing these stories, the most powerful thing you can do is simple. Hit the like button on this video, leave a comment. Even just a single word, and make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell so YouTube understands that you are here for this. Every interaction tells the algorithm that long-form storytelling still matters, that you still care about sitting with something long enough to let it settle. Please do not just listen and disappear. This community is what keeps these stories being told. I will be back tomorrow with more from Cryptid Week, a mix of cryptid accounts, Skinwalker encounters, and things that frankly I am not entirely sure how to categorize. I would love very much to see you there. A final, sincere thank you to our members and patrons, whose names you can see on the screen right now. Your support means more than I can properly say. This exists because of you. Until tomorrow, stay safe out there, stay aware, and stay awesome. Good night.